Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Gia Marone, President of Women Grow, and you are joining us for our Native American Women in Cannabis Spotlight. This is our honor to Native American Heritage Month. We've invited 4 incredible women in the industry to join us today to talk about their businesses in the industry, whether from the very early stages to the operating stage that it is today. In addition to that, we'll be talking about the industry overall, but more importantly, we'll actually segue and talk about what this month means. I don't know about you, but for me, I didn't grow up learning about Native American Heritage Month. And while I knew that there were Native Americans within my community and others, we didn't learn very much about it in school. And then even in my adult years, it wasn't something that the greater society really embraced and celebrated. But we know that there are Native American women in our community. We know that there are Native American women in cannabis, and there's a lot that we can learn. And what we continue to do in Women Grow is try to make sure that we are tapping as many of our communities as possible. And we couldn't let this month go without inviting some of these incredible women to our platform to amplify their voices, to share their perspective and insights. And hopefully, like me, I hope you'll learn something as well. I'd really like to really dive into what the significance of Native American Heritage Month means. And while many of us may be celebrating Thanksgiving later on this week, there are whole communities that are acknowledging a week of mourning. And so we thought it was important to give that voice to the platform here to help us understand that while some are celebrating, there are others that are mourning. And what we can do as an industry to support our brothers and sisters across all cultures, but more importantly, to support our Native American brothers and sisters. And so to that, we'll have each of our women first come on and introduce their businesses, and we're really excited to hear about them. And then they'll join us at the end. We'll have 4, and we'll join after the 4th to come together and begin the conversation. You are more than welcome to drop your questions in the comments, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. And so over to you, our producer, to inviting our first guest.
Good evening, good afternoon. This is just a marvelous event. I want to really compliment Women Grow and Gia for doing this. I'm Linda Mercado Greene, and I'm originally from Newport News, Virginia, by way of Moskehtu, North Carolina. My family are members of the Meherrin Indian tribe. And our tribe is still very active and still very close. And I'm just proud to be part of it. So I am also the owner and CEO of Anacostia Organics, which is a medical marijuana dispensary in Washington, D.C. It took me almost 6 years to get a license. Because DC had not really awarded licenses to those of us of color in any type of complimentary way, I would say. So I had to go on the quest of getting the laws changed in DC to create an opportunity for them to start awarding more medical cannabis licenses, and with the emphasis on east of the river, which is Ward 7 and 8 in Washington, D.C. And Ward 7 and 8 are the most underserved wards in the city. And I also reside in this ward. So it's been a joy. It's been a challenge. I named my dispensary Anacostia Organics paying homage to the Anacostians, who were the natives on this land. And this area is called Historic Anacostia. It is where Frederick Douglass actually lived, and I'm right across the street from him, from his estate. But little do we know about the Anacostians, the natives of this land. There's really no oral or written history about them. So I just wanted to salute my people who were here before. So, in saying that, Washington, D.C. Accepts medical cannabis cards from any state in the United States and any U.S. territory. And Anacostia Organics is open 7 days a week. I hire local staff and I train them in this industry because we don't have access to learn in the industry. So that's one of the things I really wanted to focus on when I opened my dispensary. I also have a podcast, Cannabis Conversations with Linda Mercado Greene. I chair the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Force, the United States Cannabis Council, for which I'm a board member of that organization as well. And I chair the DC Cannabis Trade Association, which is the association of the legal licensees in Washington, D.C. And I just want to just thank Women Grow again for this opportunity. And I look forward to hearing my colleagues' stories. Thank you so much.
Himakas katsiaya nunam hanyawa tak snich axich oikalo titoken. Inawatni twas Mary Jane Oatman, and I'm joining you all from the ancestral homelands of my people, the Nimipu people. I'm located in present-day Idaho, but our Aboriginal homelands spread across Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And it's just such an honor to be present with you all and to share with the global audience of Women Grow during this very important month for our people, and to showcase the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition, Tribal Hemp and Cannabis Magazine, and all of the phenomenal stories of economic development, spiritual reclamation, and healing that's happening for our tribal communities in plant medicine. I am the founder of the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition, and so it's really also great to come full circle with Women Grow. Just a little bit of history. In May of 2019, I worked on the legal status paperwork of the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition. So that's when we were founded. And just a few weeks later, I was on a main stage in Washington, D.C., alongside all of my wonderful colleagues here at Women Grow, allies and accomplices in elevating women's voices in the cannabis industry, and was able to provide a lightning talk. And the reason that I say full circle, coming full circle, is that for our first issue of THC Magazine, I was able to travel to MJ BizCon and really note that there is a very big need for integrating Indigenous voice and tribal sovereignty into the fabric of cannabis policy. But while I was there, I was able to see Miss Linda Mercado Greene on the main stage presenting at MJ BizCon. And that was just really a motivator to me as an emerging cannabis thought leader and protector of plant medicine to open the doors for more to come in. And that was one of the areas where Tribal Hemp and Cannabis Magazine has been integral during the COVID pandemic in when other print publications were shutting down, and just across the nation, I noticed an uptick in the print publication area. More people were staying at home reading, subscriptions were going up, and that was opportunity for us at THC Magazine to really showcase wonderful people out there in our tribal communities, like some of our guests that are here today. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us as federal legalization tees up in different fashion. And so we look forward to collaborating, outside of Indian country to get people to help us carry the water, because our populations are small, but our heart, passion, and voices are very much in line with protecting Mother Earth from the depredations that can occur through dirty farming practices, making sure that our communities and our families are safe, especially in light of some of the ish that's going on in places like Michigan with testing and just some of the things that are happening. We want to make sure that there's full transparency, compliance and regulation for the safety of our people, as well as for our Mother Earth. Our sacred sister plant definitely deserves nothing less. So I look forward to sharing with you all and learning from my beautiful sisters.
Akwe, Natasuisa Company. My name is Eileen. I'm Butterfly Woman. My name is Chenae Bullock. I come from the Chenae Nation, all of the Montauk people from Long Island, New York. I'm very much honored to have been invited to be here with my sisters this week, where we talk about Native American Heritage Month, to the National Day of Mourn, coming up on Thursday, as I am a direct descendant from those Pequot people, as well as the people, Massachusetts, the Nipmuc, the Nahagansett, the Shinnecock, the Montauk, people that were actually my ancestors. It was us that took the brunt of the cause of the celebration of Thanksgiving in the Northeast. So I'm very honored to have been asked to be able to speak about what this time means for us, or so be able to amplify our business. I am the managing director of a business called Little Beach Harvest. Very proud of this, for our tribe. The Shinnecock Little Beach Harvest is a cannabis business located on Shinnecock territory, which is in modern day what most people know of New York, Southampton being the first point of contact that the settlers had with the New York tribes, and that was our tribe, but also the first established township in the state of and so it that we are able to really be able to bridge the gap within the Hamptons in our tribe out there, and so we are in very early stages of preparing, this opportunity for our community, because the main focus is, although we might live in what most people know as the Hamptons, we don't really receive the amount of wealth that the rest in the Hamptons do. Although we are surrounded by water and land, just like it was spoken of earlier. Our focus is really getting back to the earth and getting back to the environment. So as a business leader in this industry, it is my obligation and my responsibility to make sure that, we are not left out of this industry, but we're also protecting the plant as well in this industry. So thank you.
Aikwe Nekna Lisa Sundberg. I'm Yurok from Northern California in the Trinidad Rancheria. I'm calling you from my reservation, and we're overlooking the beautiful coast of the Trinidad Harbor in Humboldt County. And my participation in the cannabis industry started when the Cole Memorandum and Wilkinson definitions came out. And I really wanted to do a deep dive into the various ways that tribes can get involved in cannabis. And at the time, I was on a local health board and got to see how the treatment of pain and PTSD issues were being handled at a clinic level, and looked at how some of the opioid abuse and things of that nature were being treated with cannabis. So it really kind of opened my eyes to all the possibilities that were available down that track. But at that time, I had to figure out how to get cannabis involved in some research. And so when I had an opportunity to join the National Institute of Health Tribal Advisory Committee, I jumped at that chance. And so now I'm working with, as my technical advisor is Dr. Sue Sicily, who has done the PTSD research with cannabis, and really kind of seeing the gaps in plant research that have not been made available to actually use natural medicine versus synthetic at the research level. So I'm actually advocating for that to happen at that juncture. And then while that's going on and just trying to figure out, just a lot of different areas in the market space, when I do enter into the THC market, I plan on getting involved in the research side. But where my passion is right now on the cannabis road is actually building homes from hemp. And so I started the Indigenous Habitat Institute recently, and I'm working with people from France who are basically helping us model what they've done from seed to home, is what we're calling it, as an initiative, and actually bringing that technology and knowledge and training over here. So I'm starting a workforce training program to teach people how to use hempcrete, and using the highest standards of not only the material, but also getting our people on the front lines trained in so they can start building with hempcrete, because I'm also on our Humboldt County's Human Rights Commission, and I'm on the homeless committee. And just in my own backyard, we need about 1,500 homes just at homeless. And we have a new polytechnic coming in at Humboldt State University that I plan on hopefully working with here shortly. And so we're all in the planning stages of getting a seed to home program going here, so that we can teach people not only how to build, but all the benefits of building with hempcrete, which is not only is it fire retardant to meet the demands of what happened with the forest fires, but also mold resistant, which is another problem that happens in Indian housing, or just housing in general, in various different locations where there's a lot of moisture. And also it's 70% energy efficient when you build from the ground up with hempcrete. So those are some of the things that I'm working on, and I'm hoping to bring this to Indian country and other communities that want to learn how to create a whole ecosystem from seed to home in their backyard and their home communities. So that's what I'm up to in hemp and cannabis. I'm not a grower. I'm a visionary strategist, political ninja, and I'm a networker. And I'm good at connecting dots. And that's pretty much what I'm doing, is enrolling the whole entire community in our area to actually make all this stuff happen. And then I'll be back to cannabis and hopefully working markets down that truck when that time is ready here in the state of California.
I have not stopped smiling this entire time. You all are so incredible. Thank you so much. Firstly, thank you all for joining us today and for sharing your stories. And each one of them, while they're all interconnected, are so different. And it's so interesting because Lisa said, while she's not in, the cannabis space yet, I mean, first of all, I love the idea of building homes with Hemp Creek. Like, that is incredible. And I hadn't expected you to say that, Lisa. But then I was like, yay, I'm so glad she did, because overall, we know that, just the relationship that the Native American community has had with the plant overall. And, what's interesting is when you think about it, it is full circle. The fact that what was used so many years ago, so many, many decades, centuries ago, are now, we're circling back to it now. And you think about the number of people who have to deal with mold, who have to deal with energy issues, right, in the home. And we're now going back to the very plant that our ancestors, right, were tapping into. So I'm so happy to hear you say that. And I'm even more happy to hear you say the training piece, right, of including communities so that they can help and build homes on their own properties. And the most important thing I heard you say, addressing homelessness. I got goosebumps. This is real talk. Like, I am not putting on, like, I got goosebumps because it's so difficult for me to understand how people can be homeless. How do we create a solution to that? And I love what you said. So thank you so much for sharing that. And then circling back to Linda, it's so interesting because I'm hearing you say that it took 6 years for you to get your business open. And then I'm hearing Chenae at the very early stages of it, right? And then thinking about what you two can learn from each other. So while you all have so much to share with the greater community and how much we can learn from you, there's so much that you can learn within your own communities, right? Of learning about best practices and what you can do together and how you can collaborate and partner. So I love this conversation. Thank you so much. Each of you are all advocates. Right. I see that. I hear it in the work that you do. And I thank you so much for all that you do. And I'd like to first say, as women in the industry, as Native American women in the industry, one thing I know for certain is that publicly acknowledging, we don't see very much. And I do hope that this conversation ignites some sort of motivation and invitation to have more Indigenous women join this industry, because I know that the talents are needed there. And so I'd like to actually start with you, Linda. One of the things that I heard you say, again, is that it took you 6 years. There's some challenges that you faced, but you honoring your dispensary with the people of which the land that it sits on, that is so dope. I think that is so incredible and so awesome. Thank you for honoring your people. But can you talk a little bit about why it took so long for you to get the license?
Yes, I'd be very happy to share that. It took a long time because, first of all, you have to do your research and collect your data. And I didn't know that much about cannabis at that time, except for, I'm a product of the 60s, so but I didn't know that much about the medicinal side of the plant. And I started doing my research and data and just started going to conferences and conventions across the country. Of course, during that time, you didn't see anybody with any type of pigmentation at these conferences, especially MJ Biz and those type of conferences. So people were anxious to know who you were and why were you there. And, and I'm a type of person, I walk up to you and start a conversation immediately. And so those became my mentors. It was, I think the first MJ Biz conference I went to was like 1,500 people. And of course, now it's 25,000, 30,000 people a few years later. But DC's laws, DC has not until recently been very cannabis friendly. And so we had only awarded a few licenses. I really wanted to be the first Black and a woman of color cultivator in the country, because my research had found during that time there were none of us uh, females that were cultivators, but there were no more licenses available in DC. And so just going back and trying to find space and that type of thing. And while I'm researching, I decided to go out this dispensary license, but I had to collect the data to see, since we're still medicinal here, how many licenses were afforded in the regulations. And then I found that there was an opportunity to reopen the process. And that's when I saw it. But during this entire time in our applications in DC, you have to have your lease, you have to have your security plan, you have to have your staffing plan, you have to have the models and serial numbers of the cameras, et cetera, et cetera. So putting all that together to go in an application also took a long time. But then you have to get the laws changed, to get the council and the mayor to go along with it. And you have to get your community to support it. So you have to do a lot of community meetings and explanation and teaching of cannabis. Actually, I held the first cannabis job fair in the District of Columbia once I was awarded the license. But I was intent on hiring people of color, people from my community, to work in my dispensary so we can learn together. And I tell them all the time, I'm going to teach you everything I know, and I'm going to have consultants teach you what I don't know. I'm hoping that you're going to be with me for a long time as I expand, but I want you to be able to take your wings and fly as well. So, it's providing that opportunity, because you can go to any cultivation site, any dispensary, and, not only in DC, but around the country, you're just going to see white people. You're not going to see people of color. So that was my focus. Yeah.
It's so interesting. And what I heard Mary Jane say during her spotlight is that she went to MJ Biz and saw you speak, and she was inspired, right? And that she was connected to you, your story, your experience. And what I took away from that, Mary Jane, is with the THC magazine, and I follow you. I first of all, you blew us away at Leadership Summit in 2019. That is still one of our most powerful images. I have to share that with our social media team. We have to post it. You closed out your talk with everyone holding hands, and it was all hands in the air. It was one of the most powerful closings we've ever had. But what I took away from you in your spotlight is that you said, you took that information, you were inspired, but you've now created a space, a product where your people can be featured, your stories can be told, your businesses can be highlighted. And my guess, it's not a silly question, but I guess you didn't find that. You didn't see it. And so I feel like you came up with, if there's a gap in the industry where we're not going to be seen, someone's got to create it. And I believe you were the one to do that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Most definitely gaps. I was just really honored to be in those spaces at the Women Grow Summit because of the mix of people that were there. I'd already seen that presence was lacking. And then to be surrounded by phenomenal people ready to help implement and assist in creating something or sharing their experiences. It was actually while I was at that conference that I got to meet Jamie Lubin, who works at Honeysuckle Magazine. And Honeysuckle Magazines was one of those that I had held in my hands, and I thought, culture and lifestyle, wow, that's really amazing. But with tribal communities, there's still so much education and advocacy that needs to happen. And so while that sounded like an amazing way to showcase cannabis communities, I knew that we had to find some middle ground with an intensive amount of education, the success stories, the beacons for tribes to be able to seek out. So far, THC Magazine is the nation's first and only print publication to date that is dedicated to the protection of tribal sovereignty and the preservation of Indigenous story. And I really feel like that's a huge responsibility to ensure that these stories are authentic and accurate and that they are coming from tribal communities themselves. And so at all times possible, I love for the stories to be written by the community members themselves so that they can tell their own place-based stories and help their communities heal from where they're at.
It's so important. It's interesting. I just had a talk maybe about a week or two ago where it was during that podcast. I said, it's so important that we do control the power of our own story and our own narrative, that we've left it, unfortunately, to the hands of others, where our stories have been misconstrued and taken out of context. So I love that you're saying the story is going to come directly from the source. And I think that's what's so important. And I'm going to circle that back to why the importance of Native American Heritage Month. But Chenae, I want to talk to you because there's something that's very interesting that's happening with Shinnecock. And so very recently, Shinnecock announced its partnership with Tilt, which is an MSO in the industry. And I know there was a little pushback, in terms of why this. But I also recognize that Shinnecock had, just in following the stories, had plans on launching the business. But it looks like this partnership will really help to support the community overall in getting your cultivation, like you have a full license, a full vertical license. And so it will help the community overall, whereas the development will happen on the reservation itself. But can you talk more about that relationship?
Yes, for sure. This is a powerful discussion we're all having. I'm learning so much. And I'm just so proud of everyone here. So, one, I want to also say that, so Little Beach Harvest does not have a license yet from the Shinnecock Nation Regulatory Division. We are in the process of getting our application. And so, but however, we are a RTO, which is a registered tribal operation for the Shinnecock Nation. We will only, and I say we, meaning the nation, will only have one registered tribal operation, and that is Little Beach Harvest. So back into 2015, that's when the medical ordinance for cannabis was actually passed through the Shinnecock Nation. So we didn't need to get a license from the state of New York. However, our process of governing ourselves, how we vote, how we come together. I was just hearing Linda saying, when you go to these community meetings, you have to educate, whether it's on the plant, whether it's on the regulations, you kind of have to bring case studies in from other states and other tribes, so we had to do the same thing, but for a tribal community. And when you talk about a tribal community, you have to realize that we're all related. So it's not just an elected official that has no tie, no clan ties to you, no historical ties to you. These elected officials can be your uncles, your nephews, your nieces, your grandmas, your aunties, your parents. And so it's just all interwoven. So sometimes that takes some time to come to a collective decision as a nation. But we've actually were able to do that. I think our community is extremely proud on how fast we've been able to move with this. Because that's kind of historic for any tribe, I'd have to say, to kind of move to any kind of decision on something. So back in 2015, our tribe passed an ordinance for medical cannabis because the state at the time, that's what the focus was medical cannabis. So it wasn't that we had to get a license from the state, but we wanted to mirror our regulations to the state because we want to be able to have access patient data, because you're talking about a sovereign nation and the state of New York. So in order to access any of that data, you have to have some sort of memorandum of understanding, some sort of agreement to do such, because we're a nation, we're not just another business. But, you know, a lot of that was kind of left unanswered. So we decided to move forward on recreational use or adult use. And so since September of this year, our tribe has actually passed that vote. So now the application process is underway for Little Beach Harvest for us to be able to submit an application to the Shinnecock Regulatory Division. There's a board of Shinnecock, you know, members that actually are creating the regulations, have created the application process, and all of those kinds of things. So they may not be as stringent as some of the other application processes throughout the country, because it still has to fit what is best for the Shinnecock Nation at the end of the day. So, you know, the tribe knows what's best for us. So it is a very unique way of doing the business, and especially when you get into like the building itself and the permits that you have to face. We don't have to have all those extra permits to build, you know, a cultivation facility. And also a lot of times people do kind of sometimes frown upon like a cultivation facility. But when you really look at the history of Shinnecock, we never left our territory. However, we were built around, we were encroached upon. And so we've been able to live where we are, but we're surrounded by 3/3 of water. And that's rising tide, that's sea level rise. That means we're losing we're losing more of our shore, we're losing more of our shelf. So to build out in the way that most people have that ability, we don't really have that ability on Shinnecock at this moment, according to the land that we have right now. There's ancestral land that we have that is not in our jurisdiction at the moment, and our tribe in other areas. And I've heard Mary Jane say this on a panel that we had a couple of months back about the levels of survival that we have to fight on. It's not just on cannabis, we're talking other areas. So when we talk about the cultivation facility, it will take an MSO that has maybe done this in other states, understand climate change and things like that. It kind of will, because we don't have any, we're not generating a large amount of revenue to build something at that capacity that will be able to produce and scale to the demand that New York has. So this partnership that we have with Tilt Holdings is very, very unique. It's hard for a lot of people to kind of, like you had mentioned, you know, sometimes people kind of up in the air about something. It's hard to a lot of people to wrap their head around what a true social equity, and I've heard some colleagues say social responsibility partnership actually looks like. And that's really what this is, because at the end of the day, there is a responsibility that is had to the original inhabitants of one of the most wealthiest places in the country. And for us to even get out the gate, we are up against so much. We don't receive the tax that the state requires the rest of the licensees to actually produce for them to put into social equity programs. Shinnecock doesn't receive that. So this is very unique, because we're not giving up our land. We're not giving up like equity in as far as the business is concerned. Those kind of things that usually typically are structured in these kind of social equity deals. That's not the case with Shinnecock. And so that's really what makes it a wholly owned Shinnecock business. And I'm very proud to, you know, be able to say that and it not just be lip service. It really is. And, you know, so that's just a little bit of like kind of where we're at. We're really excited.
I appreciate that. No, thank you so much, because that was such not only a lesson for myself, but I see our other panelists nodding their heads and learning just as well. Lisa, you're in a very special part of the country. And the reason why, look at her, she's nodding her head. Yes, girl, yes. And the reason why I say that, when I think about Humboldt County and I think about, you know, the industry itself, you know, and the information that we're getting from that territory, but the work of which that you're doing from there, listening to you talk about the boards and the organizations that you're a part of. When you think about the cannabis industry in that region, and you think about the tribal nations there, can you help us or bring us up to speed as to how things are today, where they are, and what people should know, what's happening in that region now?
In Humboldt County.
There you
Oh,
are. You're muted.
am I? Okay. Humboldt County in itself, I think, it is working on helping themselves as a county. For those that don't know, Humboldt County has been like the epicenter of THC for over 60 years. And we kind of watched the whole, people that used to get arrested here, families torn out of their, torn apart from the industry, and the hard work that everybody's done just to legalize it. And so a lot of that activity went on here. And I came from the gaming background, so I stayed far away from the black market that was going on. But still, it was a fight for, it was a fight for sovereignty. I think that that's what everybody wants, is the right to actually treat themselves however they want. And so sovereign tribes coming from a sovereign perspective, being kind of, I would say, oppressed by the federal government. You have the tribal way, and then you have what's going on in the state. And to bring up the speed as it relates to the tribe side, the tribes came together and created a coalition and tried to negotiate with the state to come up with possibly a compact to be able to sell into the state market. And those negotiations fell apart as soon as the state required a waiver of sovereign immunity. So now it's to a place where tribes are having to figure out how to play in the marketplace. And there's a handful, there's 111 tribes in this state. And so there's a handful of tribal dispensaries. So I think it's really trying to find the best models. It's about creating value chains.
Did you say 111 tribes?
Yes.
Wow.
We have the largest population of Native Americans in the country in this particular state. I only know this from healthcare because we've had to service all these people. In any event, yeah. So when you look at with how the tribes in California having to come out and play in the marketplace, with tribes being sovereign, there's still this argument over whether or not a tribal government comes up underneath the federal government, which is still federally illegal. So these are some of the arguments I have with my own community, who, while a lot of tribal members are involved in cannabis, in their own businesses privately, the council has not allowed us to try to, break out of that. I would love to have a dispensary on my reservation, but I would but it's a matter of, and I'm hoping that we get there one day. But when the banks start to dictate, what we can and cannot do for commerce on a reservation, I have a big problem with that. So, there's so many different moving parts to how you engage in the space. But I believe that the really big move that the tribes, eventually will have to make in this state, and as it relates to Humboldt, we need quality research, which is Humboldt State just is getting its polytechnic status. And I'm hoping that I can convince a tribe to be the partner for plant efficacy, because we want to exercise our sovereignty so that we can actually use the plant for real research. Because that was the one thing that my technical advisor, Sue Cicely, was having with the government research. She has the only cannabis research license from the DEA, for instance.
Right.
And there is so much shenanigans going on with that whole thing when you get down to the details of it, where they weren't allowing her to have really quality product. It was only a product that was grown out of the University of Mississippi.
Yep.
And here we are, Humboldt County, right in the epicenter. So as tribes, I want to see the tribes locally get involved and be growers for, all, not only just cannabis, because mushrooms are coming up,
Mhm.
and other uh, responsibly researched stuff where we can get dosages and treatments and things like that. So I'm hoping that that's an area that we can work into. But then you've got the business model of it. Yeah, and tribes are really it's like some have gone underground because some of the raids that have gone on, and there just needs to be a new emergence of of education of people that come who are fearful of exercising sovereignty. But I do want to say that the National Congress of American Indians actually took a position on it, which was
Mm.
good early on, and they basically said, I'm in support of it, is that while it may be on, our lands are held in trust by the federal government, but our laws apply to it. U.S.
Mhm.
Forest Service lands, U.S. government, you guys go manage that. But when it comes to tribal sovereignty, we want to dictate what we can and cannot do.
Right.
And this is really an instrument of trade. When you look at it from an economic perspective, we traded with one another. So you impact our ability to trade when, so I see tribe to tribe trade models that will be exercised up and down the state. Those models need to get flushed out, as well as cross state lines, because we were tribe to tribe. So those are battles that I still feel like, not so much in state, but when it goes from reservation to reservation outside of
Right.
that state, because there's other industries that the federal government and states have been trying to get involved in stopping us from doing commerce. So, but as it relates back at home, we are looking at, regulation has a lot to do, how you build your laws. We have so many environmental impact situations going on here in Humboldt County. We almost destroyed our whole industry, and then the whole market has crashed. So I saw and heard about a value. Mary Jane and I were on a phone call the other day with a mutual friend of ours, and he said something. He shared a piece of information that a couple of tribes on the East Coast have done with their dispensary. There's this whole supply chain model, and that is they're going to pay the farmers a good wage for their product.
Mhm.
And what's happened in California is there's such an abundance of product that has just come out. I don't know what happened. The market has just literally crashed. To have any quality of product, and price point for the farmer, that has almost destroyed the farmer, who is the supplier to the dispensary.
Right.
The dispensary is not changing the price to me, the consumer, but the price that he gets it for from the farmer has been impacted. So I believe that those business models inside of tribal communities have to be looked at, as well as any other municipality. You have to look at the value chain to the people that are servicing your particular area, and make sure that everybody eats. That's the whole point
Mhm.
of commerce, and that we have quality medicine. So how I'm supporting my own community here is working with some of the thought leaders in this particular area for Humboldt, because we are in Appalachian status. So we want to be really kind of take our place in the world of being the Napa Valley of cannabis, because we are. I mean, there's just a huge history that cannabis loves to grow here because of the temperate temperature, the soil, and there's so many different things. It's like, why do redwoods grow here?
Right.
Cannabis loves our region, and versus, so there's a certain type of, I would say people who are connoisseurs of cannabis will love, our sun-grown farmed cannabis versus indoor, for instance, and whatnot. And I'm hoping that one day that we'll have a relationship between the tribes and the universities to do the studies, so that we can get the plant efficacy down, and then we can match it up with different ailments that people have, get it into our clinics where we can get dosages administered to people. Even the veterans, or Native Americans have a lot of PTSD, and so we want to get these plant medicines research so we can get them as viable treatments inside of our clinics. And so that's kind of some of the work that I'm in the background doing, everything I can, within my my ninja powers or whatever. We all have superhero powers, but and I want to thank you too, by the way, and Mary Jane, thank you for our connection here and whatnot. So and I appreciate this opportunity to be able to share what goes on my brain.
No, I mean, first of all, thank you so much. That was so, in my head, I'm like, no, this can't be the only conversation we have, because there are so many subsets that we can go into. And I'll tell you a couple of things that I've learned from this conversation, and I hadn't thought about this before. The fact that your communities, right? We say community and it's holistic, right? But your communities are interrelated, and the education amongst your community is still very necessary. And I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought that would, like, I thought it's a shoo-in. It's like everyone would be on board. But I realized that it's not. And it requires some education there. And then the business aspect of it. And you're absolutely right. There's always been trade, right? Amongst the nations, right? The tribal communities. And then yet we don't have that. And we should have that, right? And you should have that. And then also just the overall, gosh, there's so much, man. I don't know who's watching, but I am like all geeked into this conversation. And I know that each of you, what I also recognize is you represent a different region of the country. So while your locations are different, your stories are so very similar. And which is why I understand the need to continue to have these conversations, because there's still a lot of work that I am hearing right now that needs to continue to happen within the sovereign communities, right? Like, we've got to make sure that they're getting the education, you're getting the access, we're working together and partnering. There shouldn't be a separation amongst business. It's what we've done, right? And I guess I want to keep going. Mary Jane, I have to talk about your upcoming conference, because I promised that once I saw that you were having a conference, I think this is the platform for you to, one, talk about it, and two, invite other people who are watching to learn how they can support your upcoming conference in May. And we'll do our best to continue to promote it.
Well, thank you so much. This actually goes back to the education that does need to occur. Prior to the COVID pandemic, there were not very many of the national tribal organizations creating space for conversation about hemp and cannabis. And then after things started opening back up and tribal business leaders and community leaders were gathering back together, we saw this trend of some misinformation occurring during the very limited time. Sometimes it was just like an hour long, 1 hour in, a 3-day conference set aside for tribes to learn a little bit more about cannabis. And oftentimes the price tag for entry is very high. So we've got already impoverished tribes looking for economic development opportunities, having access issues to even being able to gather in some of these spaces to learn more. And then we have tribes that are gathering for things like the Reservation Economic Summit, National Indian Gaming Association Convention. And so when we broke away and left some of these conferences, some of the Indigenous young people in cannabis right now were saying, we need to have something like this, but we need to take away the price tag, and we need to dedicate a whole day to just being able to network, to share successful business models, and to have more of a peer-to-peer kind of take all of the high price, shiny shoes, pinstripe lawyers, kind of just exit them out of the room and allow us to have this conversation. And what I really appreciated after attending this last event as well is to see that there's also a need for social events and gatherings that are more cannabis infused, that kind of checks the alcohol at the door, because that's been one of the areas of concern for myself, as well as actually having areas of social gatherings for our elected leaders, so that they can intermix in that fashion. And so when I saw that the Res 2022 had released their dates, started coordinating with the National Center of American Indian Economic Development so that we could have a full day of opportunity for tribes that are already paid and going to these conferences to have some time where there's less barriers and access to acquiring accurate, authentic information from their tribal peers that are already successful in cannabis. So May 23rd through the 26th in Las Vegas is the time frame. We're working on locking in the date right now. Got great partners out there already ready to step up. Our great friends at Students for Sensible Drug Policy, Mr. Jason Ortiz is already saying, if you need us to help you lock in that conference space fee so that we can set that, so you can start to actually do those save the dates. Volunteers like crazy stepping up, not to mention we've already just had a huge cadre of successful people doing work from technology and innovation in packaging solutions to plant touching. And then on the policy and development side, those Indian country lawyers that have been in the trenches developing those MOUs so that they get to have more robust state tribal commerce opportunities. And so, really that's the goal and that's the vision, is creating space for more inclusive conversation about economic development in cannabis, and having it being more consistent and in regions where they are lacking that access or lacking the political will to move forward in that direction, of having tribal leaders being able to call in facilitators that have that expertise or that have the networking with those experts to bring into the community, so that we can start having those conversations. Because really, there's a lot of struggle that's only going to get more. The gulf will get more wide the longer that federal legalization does not occur. We are seeing tribes now, even in states where it's medically or recreationally legal, still suffering from raids from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the DEA, even for personal medical use. And so we have a lot of work to do. And that's where we do see all of our allies and our accomplices helping us to remind the nation that our communities have always had a sacred relationship with this very specific plant medicine since prior to European contact. Our ethnographic and our ethnobotanical records very much support this, as well as our oral histories. And so we do not want to be locked out of the opportunity for the economic development portion of it. But more important than that, just as was mentioned earlier, a lot of our people are not giving themselves the permission to heal with this
Right.
sacred medicine
Right.
because of the police.
Right. Right. And it's so sad. It's so sad. Thank you for sharing the information about the conference. I know that we're going to follow up with you about that, and we'll make sure to continue to share it and promote it, to invite more people to support, not just by attending, but also the volunteering piece and sponsorship, right? Put your money where the support is. Linda, I'm going to ask you something, and I know that Chenae is going to be like, hello. Here's why I'm going to say this.
What?
Generally, when there's a misconception of what Native Americans look like,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a perception that there's only one type, right? And that's the reason why I'm asking you this, Linda, is that when we actually posted you, people were unaware that you were Native American. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, because guess what? There isn't one look, there isn't one style, which is why it's so important that we do acknowledge and we do celebrate. Many of us didn't grow up with even knowing that we were going to celebrate this month. We didn't get a lot of education in school in learning about the Native American community overall and history. And so Can you tell us again where your family's tribe? And by the way, I'm so fixated by the picture behind you. I cannot stop looking at it. I'm like, oh my God.
Former husband.
It is like
who's been a major inspiration in my life and in business. So
it's so incredible. But can you tell us your tribe again, your family's tribe? Because again,
yes.
And I say, as Chenae would say, hello, because Chenae's gotten that same response, right?
So,
and it's important that that greater communities understand there's a richness and beauty in all, and we don't all look the same. Hello.
That is so true. And I literally have first cousins who are 100% Native American with blonde hair and blue eyes. I have first cousins who are very dark skinned. I have, we are every hue in every hue possible. And so my tribe is the Meherrin Indian tribe, which is part of the Iroquois Nation, and settled on the eastern part of North Carolina. And while it was a very thriving tribe for a long time, our members have, since, died off a lot. And most of us have moved away, even though we still have tribal members on the land. We still have our powwows. We still have all of that. Keeping the history going. My first cousin was the chief of the tribe who literally traced us back to the 1400s. And he, so that is in the history and in the capital of North Carolina. When he passed, they lowered the flags in North Carolina for 3 days.
Wow.
It's a very active, on the East Coast, the tribes are very active and spend a lot of time together doing different things. That's it for the Meherrin Indian tribe. But we do look, we have every kind of look in the country.
But it's so important. I wanted to point that out because there's such a stereotype, right? It's so wrong. It's so wrong. I look at the tiles of images here, and I'm like, this is beautiful. Hello, this is original America. Hello, and so to that, as we acknowledge this month, where can greater communities go to learn more about this, right? To learn more about the history, to learn more about the education, because I think the only way to help remove stigmas, the only way to help remove narrowed perspectives is to invite the education. And so where do we direct people to learn, to go where to learn more? At this point, I'll just pick any of you.
I'll say something. I would say first and foremost, you should subscribe to Mary Jane's THC magazine. I think that's really, one, I love it. I actually carry it around I carry all of the volumes everywhere I go, at all times. Sometimes I don't want to gift them because I don't want to let go. But I think there's so much diversity in the tribes that she has in her publication that right there alone, even if it's just through cannabis lens, and then of course some of the other topics like missing murdered Indigenous women are in one of the publications, and also our residential schools, and other things like that. So you do get to see other areas of Indian country, but just alone with cannabis, you can see the diversity, not only just based upon the way they look. But I guess for me, I would say it all starts with inside of the self. People always say knowledge is the self is the most power, right? So a lot of times people are soul searching elsewhere, but not figuring out what's going on within. So once you find what's going on within, your security, no matter what kind of diversity you come up against, is so secure it doesn't matter. And so I say that for any of, especially if anyone in our audience is Indigenous, because a lot of times some of that criticism comes from our own people. See, the interesting thing about being an Eastern Native is we have swamplands, we have wetlands, we have places that we were able to stay and be protected. And when those English or French or Spanish or Dutch or German or Italian, I don't like to just put it on the English, up and down the East Coast, they couldn't get into those swamps with all that armor. We could, because we didn't have all that armor. So we were able to stay hidden. And so the history of that, I was told recently from one of my sisters who has a beautiful fashion line called Kayla Looking Horse. I've worn it in a couple of the places. She's told me, she's like, you know, Chenae, sometimes our people are comfortable being hidden, especially sometimes on the East Coast, because we have been so used to being hidden. Now that there is a demand for our visibility, sometimes we are reminded why we like to stay hidden, because we're chastised, we're talked about because of the color of our skin, the way we talk, you know, all of these different kinds of things. But just like Linda said, our East Coast tribes are thick as thieves. The interrelation, I have relatives that were Meherrin, whose wampum I'm wearing right now. You know what I mean? Because his dad lived up on Shinnecock. And so the ties that Meherrin and Shinnecock have are interrelated. And that's all the way down there in Virginia and North Carolina. And the same thing with the Anacostia River and all of those. So we've always stayed intermarried. But sometimes, like, you know, I was always taught that that's not always for broadcast. That's not always to put on display those relationships sometimes. But at the end of the day, sometimes the individual that decides to be visible, right? And sometimes that's our business leaders. That's our political leaders. That's our star people that people see. They get the criticism from everyone else because they don't see the full woven basket that's really holding them together. And me, as a highly, I say richly melanated woman, right? I've received things, but never directly to my face. But I was always taught, my medicine man said that, you know, as Native people, it's just about being who you are. Our people are able to identify each other based upon the way you dress, the way you wear your hair, the way you talk, the way you carry yourself. See, my connection with someone like Mary Jane, we have that connection because she carries herself that way. I've met her in person, so I'm saying that. But, you know, we're able to do that. And other Natives see that, and that's what it is. You respect each other for who that person is, not the way that they look, and all of those different kinds of things. And then we also heavily intermarried on the East Coast because we didn't have a choice. We're talking about Pequot War. We're talking about this particular week. I'm not going to get too deep into the soapbox, but I will say this. The first slaves that were put into slavery were those that were left of the Pequot War in 1637. They were literally put into slavery or indentured servitude. Indentured servitude, and then the African slaves, because we would have indentured servitude and you can get to the age of 21 and now you're free, you choose to marry your best friend to get them out of slavery. So when you now have intermarrying between slaves and indentured servants that were actually Native, you have a blend of a people on the East Coast. And that is not just the story of Shinnecock. That is not just the story of Pequot. That is literally up and down. But then when you have laws against the way of living for being either one of those, you have to, you begin to hate each other based upon the way you look. Meanwhile, we were interwoven. So the East Coast has a very, very unique, deep rooted history, but you can see it in our phenotype at the end of the day. And so to anybody that has any comment to say about a beautiful woman who has pioneered a space, not only just for all of us, but to everyone entering in this space, in one of the most, in the nation's capital, if you will, you know, they have a lot of soul searching, I have to say, to do within themselves, because you might be surprised that your family might even be one of those interwoven communities. So that's my response for that.
I love, listen, that is the best response of educating the uneducated. And I appreciate that. I know that, Lisa, what I wanted to ask you, I wanted to get final comments because I know we've ran over our hour. So, you touched on this a little bit, Chenae, but I mentioned this in the opening remarks. For many who are celebrating Thanksgiving, there are whole communities within yours who are acknowledging this, who acknowledge this as the week of mourning. And there are many people that don't understand that, never heard that, were unaware. And if any of you could just give context to what this means, why have we not learned about this, and what can we learn better? What can we do better? I'm sorry, what can we do better, especially in respecting our brothers and sisters in our community overall who are supporting you to say, we acknowledge you, we mourn, we grieve with you, and how can we support you? So if you can just explain what the week of mourning, what this means, and for those who are unaware. Anyone? Lisa, you're I was like, everyone's muted.
I see it as a larger part of the more general practice of erasure culture. If we are out of sight and out of mind, it's so much easier to take what we have left as Indigenous peoples, and yet we still have tenure over 25% of the nation's lands and a majority of the globe's biodiversities within those very sacred places. And so my biggest thing is about allyship and, accomplices and building those relationships, about the shared responsibilities that we do have towards our Mother Earth. It kind of always goes back towards, when you do that and you work across the fabric of humanity, then those people can use their social capital to elevate Indigenous voices. And one of the really, I think, important parts just for everybody in this, big part of healing is the acknowledgement of Indigenous places and Indigenous spaces. And that's one thing that's been really frustrating, having lived and worked in Washington, D.C. as long as I did, to see a lot of the derogatory architecture that is on the places themselves within the Beltway. But more than that, it's just a lack of recognition that underneath the concrete jungle is the footprints and the blood of so many Indigenous peoples that, occupy the lands, not occupied, still very, very much here. And so if all citizens could just take it upon themselves to have that responsibility of going to the website, www.native-land.ca, and learn a little bit more about the homelands of the people that were once vibrant and thriving within their Indigenous cultures, and now, are just walking amongst everybody else's contributing members of society. That's a big part of that responsibility, is just recognizing whose lands that we were on, because that makes it, that we moved one step further from that practice of erasure culture, and it makes us less invisible.
Can you repeat that website just once more, please?
Yes, it's www.native-land.ca, or you can text your zip code to 907-312-5085.
Thank you so much. I want to invite this conversation again. And so I know that I know Linda had to go. Lisa, before we wrap up, I'd love to get some closing remarks from you. There's so much that I want to learn, and I'd love for our community to learn about what you're doing. And I want progress on these houses. Trust me, I want to see it. Because I know that it will be amazing. Right. And I think it's just awesome. So if you can just share some closing remarks. I know, Chenae, you've got to go soon. So I want to be mindful. If we lose you, don't worry. We got you, girl. We'll cover you and share your information. But Lisa, if you can share some closing remarks, that would be great. You're muted, sis.
Sorry.
There you go.
So I really want to say that the work that I'm embarking on with the Indigenous Habitat Institute is really kind of a page out of some of the work that is being done here on a cannabis project, as a matter of fact, and it's called a triple R, and it's to basically retire, a way of doing things and restoring, what was done to the land, and then creating and replacing it with better practices. And we have to, that's what we're shifting into. And I love that President Biden, in his address to the tribes, one of his initiatives is to bring in some of the practices of the original inhabitants of the land, so that they can get some input, because we've had some disastrous stuff happen here. My mom, who was chairman of our tribe here for 26 years, used to say all the time, when you guys all got here, this was pristine land, and in a short period of time, with all of these practices, you've destroyed a lot of stuff. And now it's time where I think we've got a shift in consciousness, and hopefully enough that we can start doing, because it's not enough for me to go, gosh, that's really horrible that happened to you.
Right.
When I see reparations being done to, for other communities and still not Native Americans, there's all these monuments and all of these other things that are going on. And it's like, I'm glad that Deb Holland has got a seat at the table, because she represents us, not only as a woman, but as a Native leader, in, I think, the right spot that should have been all along. We should have been in charge of, how do we deal with the water? How do we deal with the land, and be in harmony with it? So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but the Indigenous Habitat Institute, so our first project, is a certified curriculum to teach people the proper practices on what we've learned from people that are light years ahead of us in hemp construction, because of what it can do with sequestering the carbon from the air when you grow hemp, and then also what it does for the home. And so I'm masterminding a trip to Europe so I'm going to be promoting as soon as we get all of our T's crossed and whatnot. But we want to take a delegation over to do our first set of trainings over there, and then I'm going to start the school out here, looking for local partnerships and whatnot. But we want to create a model of what that looks like. So that is something. So be on the lookout for that. We don't have our webpage up yet, but we're working on it. It's called the Indigenous Habitat Institute, and I do have a webpage up on Think Hemp on Facebook.
I was going to ask you, make sure to go slow, because I'm seeing some of the comments coming in. How can they find you, Lisa? Where should they sign up? How can they support you? Because I'm seeing the comments. They're interested.
So so Think Hemp and the Indigenous Habitat Institute are going to be working in tandem right now. I have a webpage up called Think Hemp. I haven't really blasted it out there, so there's not a lot of Think Hemp.
.com.
It's Think Hemp. No, just go to Facebook. It's Think Hemp. You can message me there, or go find me on Facebook under Lisa Sundberg, and you'll see me as a public figure. You'll see me just as myself. Any one of those, you can message me, and I'm happy to, like I said, I'm looking for people that are, want to build, and I think the women are going to be really great builders. So when I get that going, we can do 12 at a time, and once we get it going, but this first trip is to train the trainers. I need people to be trained so that we can come back to the States and use these technologies. And I would say proper practices, because these people are actually building high rises. These people, they're renovating homes at mass scale, and it's a standard way of construction, the way that they do it. And I want to follow those practices and incorporate our own, unique things. So I was in a meeting this morning with my people from Humboldt, so we want to Humboldtize, some of this stuff. But yeah, so find me again. The Facebook page is Think Hemp, Make the Shift. So that's the consciousness I want to, make people aware that we can shift into a brand new way of doing construction, life, eating, and all of that, and whatnot. And then we're going to go into foods, and I hope one day that we'll be able to bring hemp foods into the reservations. And I have to put a plug in to my daughter, because we want to create I want to do a vegan version of an Indian taco. And so Fry Bread Love is I'm a fry bread dough designer. And so as soon as I get off the phone, she's got me chained to the kitchen. I got to go make fry bread. But we use locally sourced wheat, and we're using the same kind of thing where we're really supporting local, and that is part of the whole supply chain thing. Is what we learned from the pandemic is we need to go local, and real independence, whether it's sovereign independence or even a community that can be independent in case something happens. We have to be ready for that. And I think that we have to incorporate those kind of practices. So in any event, Mary Jane, thank you for connecting us. Thank you so much for letting me be on the show. And I'm happy that I can share a little bit about what I've been doing. I usually been hiding. I never realized I got to come out and tell people what I'm doing.
You must. You was so much. And that means that we want, well, first of all, you have to know that you've got to come back. I need to hear the update on what's happening. But also, there was so much that you said earlier, and I really meant it. This conversation just can't be had in 1 hour. This requires a series of conversations, and we're utilizing our platform to amplify and to share information about all women in the industry and all communities in the industry. And so, I said it before we went live, it was really important that we had to have this happen this month. It had to happen this week. It was very intentional that it was happening this week, because in order for us to grow together, we also have to respect one another, and we have to acknowledge who we are and what we are and where we are in this community, in this overall world, right? And Chenae and I have talked about that many times. And so I thank you, sisters, for coming on here today. And we'll be sure to continue to promote your platforms, to share information about your projects. Mary Jane, I've already said it already. I'll say it a third time. Please keep us posted on your conference. I think it's so important, and I think it's very necessary. And for anyone who is an Indigenous woman watching, here are your sisters. They're doing amazing, incredible, and might I say, badass stuff. They're doing incredible work. And this is your invitation to join them. They want to see their sisters stand next to them and building and growing just beside them. So this is the invitation for you to connect with them and connect with others, and, get the THC magazine that Mary Jane has to learn more about these voices and these stories and these businesses and challenges that are happening in our communities. And I really want to stress that the research piece that was expressed today, I heard it multiple times, which means that there's a need for this information. And so if anyone out there is interested in partnering with any of these women to help bring this information to life, I invite you to connect with them. Thank you so much, ladies. We greatly appreciate you. This is Gia Marone once again with Women Grow. Hey, we're here celebrating, acknowledging, and embracing our sisters, our Native American women sisters in cannabis, and celebrating Native American Heritage Month. Thank you so much. Stay tuned. We'll have more of this incredible information to share with you. Take care. Good night. Thank you, ladies.
Bye.